I would not like to hand the floor to another inspirational leader, Mr. Emmanuel Faber, speaking as chair of ISSB.
Merci.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm in Montreal with all my colleagues from the International Sustainability Standards Board because Montreal is one of the 2 global hubs for the International Sustainability Standards Board, and we meet here in Montreal every other month for 1 week of debates and meetings to work swiftly. And our offices are 500 meters from here. And I think it's very important that we work here at the same time as the COP15. So thank you very much for having me today.
Mark started about the value of nature and the nature of value. Let me start with the value of nature. There is no way that we enough realize how much that means, and that means for finance. If you're in this room this morning, is because one way or the other, whether you are a banker, an investor, a company, I see a few faces of Canadian executives here familiar to me, or NGO, civil society, government, finance means and matters to you. The simple fact that most of us wear masks today in this room is just a reminder of how nature is just able to disrupt the way we live and the way we work. And that's been the case for a few years, and it may continue in the future. If you want to really be more personal about understanding that, I'll suggest a very quick, using 10 seconds of this session for an experiment. Just stop breathing. 1, stop breathing. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You can start breathing again. Yeah, but that's 10 seconds. Imagine that's 1 minute. How would you imagine, you're here for your work, how would you imagine that your work is not going to be impaired, impacted, if you can't breathe? Fresh air, the air we breathe here, is taken for granted. That very, very basic point. So to Mark's point, to me, it's not only that most of economy is impacted by nature. By nature, everything is impacted, and that includes economy, and that includes what we call finance, which is supposed to be a system disconnected somewhere. There is no system. You are the system. There is no traffic jam. You are in the traffic jam. No, you are the traffic jam. I'm the traffic jam in the morning. So that's where we are. Don't look at it as something difficult to change. It's just changing us, and that's probably why it is so difficult. But the value of nature is fundamental. Without nature, there's no life. It's as simple as that. So forget finance, forget funds, forget returns to shareholders, forget everything. The tragedy, as Mark said, is that we do not value nature. And the nature of value then. Because today, as much as there is a tragedy of value, there is a tragedy of accounting. We count many, many, many things important, but we do not count everything. We certainly do not count the air. We don't count water, we don't count oil. We count the price for extracting the oil, but not the fact that it took 100 million years to make it. We do not count for the soil degradation. Soil is not an asset class. You cannot have a damage function on an asset class that is 0. So that just doesn't work. And that's what is needed for change. So one of the reasons why the ISSB was created with the support of G7, G20 multilaterals about a year ago in Glasgow is because we need to come from this, most of the time, well-intended ESG metrics and landscape that was established to find a way to look at the nature of value of things that we do not actually count. But that's a very discrete set of standards quite some time, no connectivity between them all. Not even standards actually, but metrics and disclosures. A lack of connectivity and certainly lack of consistency, sometimes even antagonistic. The reason why ISSB was created was to end that, end the alphabet soup and go from ESG to sustainability. And I want to share something this morning, which is news, because that's a unanimous decision that we made yesterday at the ISSB, which is we took our mission to design a conceptual framework for sustainability for finance and business very seriously. We felt that it was absolutely needed to create that consistent language. And so we described sustainability, observing to start with from the integrated reporting framework and borrowing from that framework, that the value created by a company is inextricably linked to the stakeholders that it works with and serves, to the society in which it operates, and to the natural resources on which it depends. Inextricably linked. This is the nature of value. The second thing is that we've then described sustainability as being the ability for a company to maintain and develop over time the relationship, to manage the dependencies and the impacts in its entire business ecosystems, whole value chains. And the third is that we describe sustainability as a condition for a business to continue to access over time the resources, human resources, natural resources, financial resources, that it needs to reach its objectives by the preservation, the development, the regeneration of those resources. That is what unanimously we decided. So we are basically embedding in the core of our foundational S1, the general requirement standards that define the principles against which any company will have to report to the financial providers of capital for the company, the banks, the investors, and others, the way we mean that conversation to happen. It's no more about ESG metrics that you can pick and choose. It's about that deep connection of what the nature of value is. And only by considering that preservation, development, and regeneration of all these resources in the ecosystems will companies be able to ultimately create value for their financial capital providers. So from an idea that is going to be in the standards of the international global baseline of sustainability-related financial disclosure that we are looking at finalizing in the next several months. That's why I think it's important for all of you. Thank you. I wanted to say that because that's the foundation from which we can then elaborate, and back to what Mark said. We started with climate because we were told that climate was urgent. And when I say we were told, probably by a number of you, an organization like the ones that you're working with, that yes, there is an urgency to create this common language on the basis of which finance will be able to make informed choices, to resync its thinking about value creation with the needs for companies to adjust their business model to create resilience. It's not so much about saving the planet for companies. It's to start with just saving their business because it entirely relies on nature. And certainly climate is a huge element of both risks and maybe opportunities. For one reason, climate change will redefine competitive advantages in the next 10 years. For all companies, all investors, actually all countries, access to water, access to energy, access to soil and food, all of this will be tested in the future. That is an opportunity, if you do it proactively, to engage in the reshaping of competitive advantages. And this is why it matters so much for businesses and for finance. So we started with climate, but we said not climate first. Actually, that's the consultation that led to the creation of ISSB. And this is where is the second news. We are actually moving to the next immediate stage, because in Montreal, actually in October, we decided that there was probably, from the feedback we received, a strong connection between climate, natural ecosystems, and just transitions. Companies will not be able to implement their climate resilience plan without addressing some important topics in natural ecosystems and some important topics in human capital, starting with a just transition, which is like, what do you do with reskilling your workforce? What do you do in the supply chains? And that's both, again, a matter of accessing to the resources that you need, but also thinking about the transition risks, because no governments will actually allow the scale at which things need to happen without actually creating incentives for companies to do it right. And it's about nature, because nature is, of course, as was shared, one of the first victims of climate change. But it is also, as Mark said, a provider of solutions. Nature-based solutions are here. We do not put value on them, but we will tomorrow through the disclosures that we are going to work on. So we have decided that we would immediately advance work to build from the climate standards, which should also be ready in the next few months, to extend that one immediately to the connection with natural ecosystems, deforestation, water, biodiversity, and the connection with the just transition. On the first one, I would echo what Mark said about the task force for nature-related financial disclosures. We will consider the work of the task force as much as well other initiatives which are focused on the materiality for economic and financial decisions. In particular, we will be very interested in the recent work of TNFD on that exact connection that exists between climate-related topics and nature-related topics, that integration of the agenda, because that is where we want to scope that extension, immediate extension of our climate standards. The last thing I'd say is we need help and support, and we are going to appoint, we announced today, actually, we will appoint 2 special advisors to help us in that work. One is Karin Kemper. Karin is from the World Bank. She's just retired as the Global Environmental, Natural, and Blue Economy Director for the World Bank. She's contributed and has been a force behind the changing the changing wealth of nations report of last year, and many others, by the way, in particular in water topics. That's exactly about putting value on nature, ecosystemic contribution to economics at a macro level. But of course, we will be inspired by that at the microeconomic level for companies and businesses. And the other person will be Gordy Hungerford. Gordy is the CEO of the First Nations, thank you, of the First Nations Financial Management Board here in Canada. He's a Gwinnett as a nation from the Northern Territories and Yukon, and of course with our base here in Montreal. I think Gordy and actually the First Nations can really inspire us, in particular at the nexus of just transition and biodiversity. I don't think I need, but I will still just state here that, as many, probably all of you know, the close to 500 million persons in the world that primarily would define themselves as belonging to First Nations are guardians to 80% of wild biodiversity in the world. And that is a very powerful nexus, and we want to be inspired and guided in our work with that. Thank you. So, in the interest of your productive finance day, I'll just stop here, but this is to say that everything that I have said here is happening a few hundred meters from here. I think what we are invited to do here is basically rewriting economics in order to make sure that we have the proper economics to guide us through the transition, reconnecting us with life, because we've probably disconnected ourselves, and certainly we in finance have deeply disconnected. So that is both, I think, and personally, I leave that as a very inspiring and energizing work, and I hope you'll find that fulfilling for yourselves. So enjoy the Finance Day today. Thank you.